first speaker, and I'll let him have it because he was also one of the ones that came to our first meeting. He was up here back in 1995. His name is Scott Hardaway. He's a senior research scientist at VIMS, the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. And he has actually been involved in the design and construction of, we were talking yesterday, is that 100 of the Living Shoreline projects? Give or take. He doesn't count too well, but it's up on the 100. He's probably one of the longest-term practitioners in this area, and so we're very lucky to have him here. Scott, all set?
Thanks a lot, Jay. It's great to be back in Long Island. We had a great field trip yesterday looking at, you guys really got slammed with Sandy, no question about it. We get slammed all the time, but you got slammed hard, so it's interesting to see how you recovered great. Yeah, I was here 18 years ago and talking about, at that time it was more like soft, non-structural types of approach to shoreline erosion control. I've been at VIMS going on 34 years, and from day one I've been out in the field looking at the issues of shoreline erosion, particularly in the Chesapeake Bay, a relatively fetch-limited body of water. If you look at Chesapeake Bay and Long Island, if you align them together, they're very similar in their geomorphology. The Chesapeake has, I think, a lot more tidal creeks and such. But today, I thought to sort of start this off, I would go back in time and bring you through a series of projects that we've been involved in over the years and showing you that there's some history behind the use of marshes and beaches for shore protection. The living shoreline is actually kind of a recent term, but back in the 70s it was called marsh fringe creation, oddly enough. And in Maryland and Virginia it was basically called the non-structural approach. And then in the early 80s we actually had some funds to go out and plant existing substrates of marshes in the hopes of finding some where the wave energy limit was based on basic fetch. In 2006, David Burke, who used to be the head of the Maryland non-structural program, actually put together the living shoreline kind of package. He felt that you needed to get out, the word needed to get out, and more people needed to be aware of it, and that's kind of how it evolved over time. My simple application of living shoreline is basically to apply marshes and or beach establishment for erosion control rather than hardening the coast. Sometimes there's a combination of things. Shoreline erosion. We got almost 15,000 miles of shoreline in Chesapeake Bay, including Maryland and Virginia. Back in the 70s, the Soil Conservation Service was often had this kind of issue. This was pulled out of one of their manuals in like 1971, and this was their spec for putting in a marsh. Pretty simple. You plant it in the marsh will accrete sand and grow and attenuate wave action. So really they were sort of the basis of the beginning of these types of things. There was research at that period of time by various folks, Paul Knudsen and Woodhouse, Broom and Seneca in North Carolina, Ed Garbish in Maryland, in terms of they did wave studies and had plots of where these things would work and where they wouldn't work so good. We had the vegetative erosion control project. Basically, it turned out basically a fetch limited application. Exactly that fetch, we'll get to that. But that's usually the primary parameter when you're trying to cite these types of things. There's other things, which way that it's facing toward the dominant storm condition, the shore geometry, near shore bathymetry, both ways. Sunlight, as we didn't know at the time, but that's definitely an issue. So marshes, I won't go into the ecosystem services, but that's a plus. You put a revetment in, it does a great job of shore protection. If you can put in a marsh and maybe a sill type of structure, you can attain the same type of elevation and level of protection. So I won't go through this. I think most of the folks realize marshes are different for habitat, water quality, and so forth. We basically have, if you take the 15,000 miles of shoreline in the bay, you can kind of go high bank, low bank. Low bank being impacted by the 100-year storm. That's what we try to look at, how the storms are going to impact the coast, and a high bank. So low bank, your infrastructure is impacted. High bank, infrastructure not so much, as long as it's not next to the cliff. So you have beaches, marshes, dunes, and beaches. If you have these in a natural setting, they're wide enough and high enough, they do a great job of attenuating wave action even during a storm. So some examples, this would be a stable shoreline in one of our typical tributary creeks. But as that marsh tends to erode away, the waves kind of get to the base of the bank, so it kind of starts to erode. When the marsh is gone, it becomes an erosional issue. So this would be a low bank situation. A higher bank, obviously stable with a fringing marsh, bank vegetation, then it becomes undercut. And on a more extreme, I would say, out on the rivers and bays, you get these high cliffs that are eroding. So you have the whole gamut of different shore morphologies. But in the, from World War II, from the advent of leisure time, when people started moving to the coast and living on the shoreline, this would be the typical response to shoreline erosion. You put in a bulkhead, you grade the bank, and you deal with the storms in that capacity. With time, these of course rot, and you put in a new one. And in the 70s, the rock really came into its own, doesn't rot, and if put in properly, it could last indefinitely. But so it's good for erosion control, but some of you sacrifice some of the nearshore and shoreline habitat. The erosion control project that we did, we planted grasses all over the place. We actually planted them on the bay. We knew it wouldn't work, and we walked away from the planting site. The guy, my friend, they said, "Well," I said, "Lee, as soon as we were walking away from the planting site, the grasses started washing out." I said, "Lee, the grasses are washing out." He said, "Well, now we know." So that set the stage. So anyway, we planted different sites, and this was in fetch limited areas up creeks and stuff, and they did well for a period of time. This one lasted over 10 years, and then it kind of degraded, and the guy bought it and bulkheaded the property. So we have a certain database of successes. This site was, you can see how small a fetch it is. It's probably a few thousand feet. But it was put in the existing substrate, and it's good after 24 years. So, these things have durability. They have a history behind them of actually working. So I think that in itself adds credence to some of these applications. Now this is kind of one of the failures to some degree. This is in a Portoman River. It's got a mile fetch to the north. And as you can see, it's very shaded. Planted it a few times. And after a period of 20-odd years, the landowner got tired of messing with it, so he put a smaller bat in. So those are some of the issues you have to deal with where the site is sited. Sunlight, 6-hour day is basically what they talk about. So the summary of this is basically, if it's less than a mile, you can probably plant some grasses in there. Actually, it's probably less than that if you're not going to use a structure. 1 to 5 low probability, and if it's greater than, and there's no way it's going to work. So it became evident that just planting existing substrate was not, you needed a little more, so adding sand to increase the fringe and then planting became kind of the way to do it. And so this project's evolved from this. Ed Garbage did a lot of these in Maryland. I mentioned Basker. We'll talk more in detail about this, and I mentioned some of these people because to show these people were there in the 80s and 90s, and they were instrumental in running that program. Kevin Smith was there at the time, and the current personnel. Kevin's still there. He's been working as long as I have on this. Tom Brown and Basker. One site put in the mid-80s was we use sand. We're going to put rock groins in to contain the sand. So you come in and clean the bank out, put in your sand, put in your stone groins, and the little wood things was, can you see the string is loose exclusion fence, which is critical. And after 4 years, it just looked great. I mean, it did everything you can imagine. There were some boat leaks. Well, I went back a few years later, and it was all tattered. It was beat up. It hadn't really been maintained. The front edge was eroding. The marsh roof, the spartile internal floor was about gone. And you could see the trees were coming over. So if it had been maintained, there might have been a better outcome. I came back actually just a few months ago, and it was almost completely wiped out. The groins are still intact, but you can see it's back to where it was before. So it offered some degree of protection for some period of time, and I think it became evident as time went on that use of possibly shore parallel rocks would be the preferable way to do this. Shading kills the plants north facing. I want to emphasize the geese. You put in a $50,000 marsh, and it can be gone in a week if you don't keep the geese out. It's a good story. And they still like it even after it's full grown. So I don't know how you deal with them. I know how we do. Anyway, so sills became a a part of the so-called toolbox of erosion protection used in marshes and beaches. And this is a site on the Patuxent River, Maryland. And after 16 years, it's doing great. I mean, it's done everything you could ask for. It's a low rock sill in front of eroding agricultural lands. And I put this up to show that as people are trying to get people to do these things, the bulkhead kind of takes away from that habitat. The marsh, the riparian buffers are really big in the Chesapeake Bay. And the lower slide sort of shows the benefits of these types of things from habitat and water quality, shore protection, flood control, and in the long term, possibly sea level rise as these systems can migrate land. Typical sill cross-section, rock, put in some sand, put in the plants, depending on the site conditions. So if you have a small fetch, so less than a half a mile, you can probably put in a smaller structure, not so much sand. I put the storm surge levels up there because I think that's an important component when you're designing this to know exactly what you're up against as far as frequency of return. Zoom down. There you go. As the fetch gets a little wider, you typically need a little more protection. Needs to be a little wider, needs to be a little higher. And I wouldn't say that we have a detailed criteria for this, but we have a lot of sites where this kind of increased dimensionality of the structure that we employ. For a high bank, the question is, do you grade it or do you not grade it? Then when you start talking about grading banks in the riparian area, you get into different kinds of legal issues and what you can and can't do. So the jurisdictional issues are still there today in both states and around the country, and sometimes those will dictate what you can and cannot do in terms of this type of approach. This actually has an 8-mile fetch. It's on the St. Mary's River. This is a sill site, and I've put a few elements here, kind of busy slide, but basically you can see the sill structure, the sand and the plants are planted, and it's doing a great job. Actually, Isabel came in, ran right up it, ran across the bank. So low bank situations have a certain advantage to high bank situations. You almost have to have a bigger buffer with the higher banks. One of the issues that came along as these sills were being put in by Maryland and Virginia, people were saying, well, this is nothing more than a revetment offshore with grass behind it. What good is that? The critters can't get to it. Well, that was sort of an extremist view because critters can get through the rocks. Put holes in it, open it up. Okay, let the turtles in. All right. So started opening these sills up to let creatures to get in. There was thought that it might improve water quality. It does add diversity. I don't have a problem with it. But one problem you get with them is the sand fill behind becomes a little beach and it hooks up, and sometimes you cut off the benefits they're looking for. The other problem is not only do you let the critters in, you let the waves in too. And so you get this little erosional thing. So sometimes you do different things to accommodate that. You can see the sand will accumulate there, sort of cut that access behind the structure out. But as far as creatures, they love these things. Fish, the crabs, they're great little habitats, especially the rock, but they're in there for the marsh on the backside as well. Well, one of the things that we tried different is to put different things in the sill. This is a revetment that was put in to kind of keep this thing from hooking up, and it's done a really nice job, actually. The waves kind of reflect, and it kind of keeps that access on the behind the sill intact. So in terms of marsh fringe applications, you can plant existing substrate, fairly fetch limited. You can add different kinds of containment structures. I've seen some places where the groins actually work pretty good. But stone sills are really kind of become the standard, if you will, for creating stable marshes for shore protection. And the level of protection should be assessed. So you have a site. You put in the sill and the sand. You have to keep in mind access to the site. What is a real positive is actually the sand fill that we use a construction road. So you can drive up and down on this road, putting in your rock. When you're gone, you can plant it, and bingo, there's your marsh. This is a site in Virginia, and I show this because I'm going to segue into another application. We're standing kind of on a beach. This is a really nice sill system, but sills, lot size issues are probably important, but when we look dealing with it on a reach basis. So if you have a bunch of people on a reach, you should all work together. It's kind of the mantra there. This is the site. We were standing right there. And you can see this is a fairly extensive sill application. This is several hundred feet. This is actually, we're put in to have a little pocket beach for access. A revetment was put in there to protect this old mill. And then the sill went down and stopped and protected the upland, but it stopped short of the marsh. And then there was another structure down there to kind of hold that spit. So you can see these things can be a combination, can have a variable plan forms. And this dark stuff out here is submerged aquatic vegetation, and the key is try to stay off of that. That's a no-no in the jurisdiction. I'm going to shift to beaches, and I'm going to, because I think in a lot of places, as you get over a mile of fetch, you have an many areas where beaches would be a good thing to try to put in. And they have their own ecosystem services as well, a little bit different. They actually do a pretty good job of nutrient cycling through their meal fauna that sit into the interstices of the beach face, turtles, so forth. But if you have a beach, big and wide, like shoreline behind a spit, there's a great job of shore protection. But these are actually few and far between in reality. Putting sand out there on a persistent basis is usually safe for localities, so private properties have a bit of a time with that. And even the smaller localities in the bay, the problem is that continuing beach nourishment is costly and ongoing, whereas adding some kind of gutters, groins, sand containment structures, breakwaters in combination becomes more or less the most cost-effective way for long-term protection. This is one of the first projects we worked on in Virginia, put in 1985. It is still doing a good job today. This was a developer who wanted, these weren't there when he put this in. He actually went to put the system in before he put the houses in, which is kind of a switch for the way we usually do things. We build the houses, and you have 40 different types of shore protection. But this thing is, we kind of watched this over the years and monitored it, and I show this slide to show you that you really can't tell the difference from '02, before Isabel, through time. The plan forms are set in there very well. They do a good job of shore protection, and you have a nice sandy beach and backshore. So they're very durable. You really haven't had to do any maintenance on this. And there's a 5-mile fetch in one direction and a 10-mile fetch in the other. So these things perform pretty good. This is a project on the James River, and this has a pretty strong fetch, 12 miles to the north. And this was a project that a guy, Mr. Luder, wanted to put in, and he had about a mile of shoreline. You can see it's fairly extensive. It's not your single property owner, but you could have 12 property owners there working together on it. And it looks like this. And in 2004, even after it held up very well after Isabel. And the dunes, you kind of keep replanting the backshore to some degree, but it's held up well and done a great job for shore protection. And I showed this slide to show you that, at some point, how much money are you going to spend on these things? Because, every time you add another foot of sand or you add another half a foot of rock, you start to talk about volume of material, cost, and so forth. So balancing that with the shore protection is a bit of a trick. But I show you this to show you some of this, that it does get scarped during storms. You might have to repair it. Marshes sometimes need to be cleaned out. Sometimes you might have to replant them. So there's actually can be a maintenance component to this, and some people want to put in a shore protection structure and be done with it. But there are people who are the opposite. They want some of these benefits of having beaches and marshes for the various qualities, and also sometimes it's an access to be able to walk along the water. So there's trade-off and there's benefits to all of these. Breakwater sites, there's a lot of them around the bay. These are not all of them by any stretch. These are some of the ones I call more larger sites. A lot of smaller ones that people have put in over the years. Sometimes they make them too small, they don't put enough sand in, but generally they have held up very well. And we try to track these over time so that we can talk about them in places like this. These things are working great, don't do this. And we've developed some guidelines. This one here is basically, you have a breakwater length, a gap, and the weak link in these, of course, is this bay in the middle. So that thing has to be big enough and wide enough to withstand design storm conditions. And then you can configurations. We have some rules of thumb. There's some engineering, some science, and there's some art to it. And this is sort of MB is this indentation, which would be the 1, and the 1.65. These can vary considerably depending on your setting. You can have these things actually fairly wide apart if you have a unidirectional wind wave line. If it's coming from many different directions, you tend to close it in, because the deal is you really don't want to lose the sand that you paid a bunch of money to put in there. And one of the key things, especially with a breakwater system, there can be just as dangerous as a growing field in terms of down-drift impacts. So basically the first thing you do is go down-drift and find out what that impact's going to be and figure out how you're going to accommodate it. And there's different ways to do that. This is a 70-foot bank that was created for this condo development. And some of the interfacing structures, that you have a main system and you have to stop it somewhere. One way to do it is to put a transition into a revetment to deal with the impacts. Another one is to put a smaller structure on the other end to kind of interface it. But nevertheless, the impacts are there, and you have to be prepared to accommodate. That's why dealing with these things on a long reach basis is a good thing. And looking at Google Earth, I look at Peconic Bay, for instance. It seems to be pretty sandy coast around there. You have creeks and jetties and stuff coming in. You know, these are places where you might have what I call geomorphic opportunities to enhance beaches on either side of it. Since you already have man-made boundaries, it becomes actually easier to kind of work from there. And so actually Isabella, and this was heavily vegetated, had a nice riparian buffer. Isabella was a +8 when it hit this part of the James River. The Kingsmill Marina, which is not shown here, suffered about $2 million worth of damage. And this thing, you know, hardly got hit at all. I mean, vegetation was so thick the waves took care of it. I mean, they were taken care of by the heavy vegetation. And once again, I show you this sort of series of shots to show you that, you know, you look at it, well, they look all alike. Well, yeah, that's because they're stable pocket beaches. And that's the best thing you can have in a beach world, is a stable pocket beach. It absorbs the waves, have the waves come in, hitting the shoreline all at the same time. And it does, they do great when properly designed and constructed. Now, I show you this one. These don't happen every day, but there are different applications for these things other than right on a piece of upland property. This was the city of Hampton. This is at the mouth of the bay. It's looking right out toward Portugal. And the 1937 spit, which was this is a nature preserve in here. And you can see in 2009, you can see it's basically gone. And the waves were rolling through the back bay area. There's a marina back there. Residents were looking for some answers, and I was shocked they came up with the money to do this. But nevertheless, I show this because one of the things that always is an issue with these systems is where you're going to get the sand. The rock comes in by barge. The sand in this instance comes from dredging this offshore shoreline. And I know they do that on the ocean coast and in the different inlets and stuff for beach nourishment projects. But here's a case where we took it right off there and built this fairly nice beach system that did very well under sandy. And now you have a very nice dune beach system, which was once basically a shoal. Now, many would argue, and I'd say many would argue, that the shoal is just as beneficial to the fish population as this. And I think that's an ongoing discussion we have in the bay and different states as to trading one habitat for another. And that's a decision that we all have to come up with and we have to make. But sometimes you can do it and sometimes you can't. I throw this in because I know there's a lot of public lands in here. If you have a beach nourishment project going on, it's amazing what one structure will do for you. You can perch that beach in there, and if you know you're putting sand in there, you can put less structures, you can put them further apart. But once again, you do have an impact, you need to be prepared for that. I'm getting toward the end, and I thought I would come into where I work at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. And Isabel beat us bad. This was the ferry pier. It took that out. It took out a bunch of short stuff on the front, storm drains. It beat up the other shoreline as well. This shoreline looks out the mouth of the York River. It's got a 20-mile stretch. This looks up the storm. And it wasn't quite high water, but she rolled in here and did significant damage to some of our infrastructure. And Isabel, which was a little early, actually prompted General Assembly to put funds toward putting in a system, some breakwater system around Venice. And we were in the process of putting it together, and Esther hit, so I said, okay, we need to get to work on this thing. So these are 2.5, 3-foot waves, 80-foot wavelength. These are pretty good waves for the Chesapeake Bay. So here's the design we developed. This one on the more exposed shore actually kind of centers around some of the storm outfalls that need to be replaced. We had to watch out because there was SAV in here. There was a revetment in certain sections of this, so we had some sort of a backup. We had a public beach which we had to interface with, and this is the upriver coast, and this is a 250-foot breakwater because it had to make this turn. And this right here is the shoal that drops off pretty deep right there. So there are different components that we had to deal with, and this wasn't in the original design, but they decided to put a building down here in the floodplain. So we actually had to add another breakwater to the site. So it's sort of adaptive management. This was shortly after construction, looking at the main system on the open riverside. And we planted dune grasses. We have some marsh grasses going. We're assessing it. The travel time is short. One thing about enhancing this beach was not only just from a shore protection, storm protection issue, it was also, and habitat was also because a lot of Vim's research, there's a lot of oyster work going on in these hatcheries here, and access to the water and putting out their cages and stuff became important. And so these are research projects. This is a research beach as much as anything else. People do all kinds of things up here. Folks are climbing all over the rocks, looking at the oysters. There's oysters going on. So we have a good opportunity to be right here and do different things with it, looking at this particular system. Now, we go on the west shore. It used to have a pretty good beach on here, but people kept hardening the coast up drift and putting in breakwaters and stopping the sand. So there's a downward impact to us. So we were able to, there was enough funding to do this side of the institute as well. That's our boat basin and ships and stuff. And this is what it looked like before. The beach had gone over the years, and it was eroding back into the riparian buffer, the pay-tins. And so the project was underway. And I show this because we see a lot of slides of the project before and after, but it's the during that can be kind of the challenge for a lot of landowners. And the during is not necessarily a pretty sight. Stockpiles of rock, huge machines driving through the water. They got to be especially inspected to make sure they don't drip oil into the river. Sometimes you have to put safety booms across it. And what happens is that the sand is brought in and moved along the shoreline, and the sand, and it's shaped into the embayment that we like to see. And the sand actually becomes the access road, and it also becomes the access road to build structures offshore. So there's different components in how the contractors do it. Is that interesting and quite amazing in many capacities. So we planted the back shore with dune grasses, and today they're looking great. Sand went through and hit it a little bit, but we didn't get anything really, relatively speaking. So I'm going to sum up both marshes and beaches. In this next couple of slides, basically as your fetch gets bigger, you kind of consider having a wider, higher marsh. It really is, once you get a fetch of a half a mile or a mile, some of the waves can be enough to be troublesome, and oftentimes you need some type of rock structure to maintain it. But if you put it in, you keep an eye on it, it'll last for a long period of time. And we have a quite large database in the Bay. I think Maryland has as many sites as any other state, really. And because of that, we can talk sort of decidedly and confidently about using the shorelines in the proper circumstances, especially in the states like New York, in the special limited area, South Bay, Connie, and so forth. Beaches, really, beaches like to live in a higher energy area. They like to berm. They like waves on them in reality because the marshes, try to just put a beach in up a little creek, well, grass will start growing on it if you're not careful, so, which is not always bad. So usually sometimes there's a combination. Which brings us to New York, in Dalton Point. I was here with Jay a few years ago. Forget how long it was. And we looked at Dalton Point. It was an interesting little place here, right here at the end of this little cul-de-sac. This is the kind of a community beach property. And it was, there was a little beach there you could use. There was a little eroding uplands. The bulkheads, you know, the whole place up and down is mostly bulkheaded. And there's a lot of canals that were put in there. And these were basically failing on the front. And the idea was to try to apply site-specifically create a marsh and beach environment here instead of the hardened bulkheads, which were failing. And here's sort of what, if you were standing at the end of the cul-de-sac looking east, you see this old, I'm not sure exactly what it was for, but these bulkheads are falling apart, the groins are rotten, the shoreline's eroding. It's got a 1 mile fetch across Great South Bank. So it gets, you know, has an impact of about a 1.8 foot tide range, which is great for marsh. The 6 and 8 foot tide range has become a little problematic. So here's the design. This is the old wooden piece we saw off to the left. And the existing doesn't show too good, but there's the cul-de-sac. And one of the issues was because it's so low, the concern was if we put a beach in here, stable as it may be, there will be at some point a storm that will come over and tend to wash the sand into it. So we actually had a little concrete barrier to kind of keep that from happening. So if we start at A, and we go to B, C, D, and E, we're going to look at the cross sections and just a little more details. Basically, this is going to be become a sill, pull out the bulkhead, put in this small breakwater unit, put this beach and access right in front of into the cul-de-sac, so you can just kind of go right in after you go around the barrier. And then you transition into another trapezoidal cross-section type of structure. Then it goes into a stone revetment that goes along. So you really have 3 different types of structures here. So here's the kind of fuzzy. This was Hardaway CAD, so trying to save some money. So we pulled the bulkhead out and put the little sill in here. The deal was, instead of encroaching on the state bottom, actually pull the land back. You know, sacrifice the upland a little bit. You know, give a little. You know, and then plant your marsh in there. This is more of a trapezoidal. You see the larger breakwater. You know, it's out on the open South Bay. Got a core in it, and we will put beach fill in behind it and plant it. And then this was a CC is really what the pocket beach would look like. That's this configuration, and we sized it so that it would be hopefully a stable configuration. Like I say, sometimes you have to add sand. And that was the little concrete structure barrier. Then as you go over to the other sill structure, you're going to go ahead and cut this up, leave most of the bulkhead, cut it down, and move into the upland. It could be a shape. And then around the corner, pull the bulkhead out actually, and put a revetment behind it. Once again, instead of encroaching, because the canals aren't that wide anyway. Plus, they get kind of deep, and the substrates can be questionable. And so that was the answer to that. But that is actually still on the drawing board, I understand, and maybe one day.